this thing on? Hello, testing. Something in there.
Eden to the rescue.
I wondered, and I said, oh, I forgot to ask you if you started there.
Yeah, my sons are playing, but not my cats.
Oh.
Well, good evening, everyone. Hello, it's good to be back. Great to see you. I'm Robert Buxton. I'm going to do some classical piano and some gospel at the end, and I'll talk about it a little. So first, I'd like to improvise for you, because that's what they used to do in the 19th century in classical music. And you believe they used to improvise. And let's do it this way. I'll ask you for some random notes, if you wouldn't mind. Any notes, just one note. Anybody?
D.
Was that a D? Or E?
E.
Oh, E, sorry, I misheard. E. Okay, good. Let's have a few more.
C.
C and B, you said? Okay.
Is there
and
L?
No, there's no L. No, sorry. It doesn't go that far. But wouldn't that be interesting if there was?
An F.
And an F. Okay, maybe that's good. Or maybe one more. You can give me a flat or a sharp note too. Oh, that's good. I like that. You know, that's a nice thing.
Oh?
Okay, well, I'll do something with it. Okay. Nice melody. Maybe I'll steal it and use it. Do you mind? Because it went in a Russian direction. Yeah. It went to a Russian, and I'm part Russian, you know, my mother's from Moscow. Not Idaho, Moscow, but Moscow. Yeah, because people, I used to joke with my friends in school, we'd say, oh yes, the Moscow Conservatory of Music in Moscow, Idaho. So maybe there's some of that Russian thing going on there. Well, I'm going to start off with Beethoven today, who was, well, he was not Russian, as a matter of fact. But this is from his violin concerto, but he arranged it himself for piano. solo, or rather piano and orchestra. I made a version for piano solo. So I played you the last movement of this the last time I was here, about a month ago. I'm going to do the second movement, which is very tranquil. I'm going to play this. It's not too long to start off, today. So the violin concerto has a very interesting history because Beethoven wrote it in 1806. It's kind of in the middle period of his compositional life. And it was not received well at the time. Actually, the first performance was a disaster because it's very long. The first movement's 25 minutes long. It's almost like how long it took me to drive here. It's a long, long movement. And half the audience fell asleep. The violinist, Franz Clement, at the premiere, he was not happy with that, and also the fact that Beethoven gave him the last few pages handwritten, like right before the performance. Talk about procrastination. So the violinist, at some point between movements, he took his violin, he turned it upside down, improvised a country fiddle tune to wake everybody up. And this was sort of a mess. Beethoven was not happy, and that's why he rewrote it for piano from the violin. But I think that what people were not getting at the time was how personal this music was for Beethoven. On the surface, especially the second movement I'm going to do, on the surface it's very calm and placid and meditative. But actually there was a volcano going on in his life. He was losing his hearing at this time. And he wrote about it in a famous letter to his brother. It's called the Heilige Stadt Testimony. You can read it online. I read it, and it's moving because he talks about how he considered taking his own life even because he couldn't see a future with himself not hearing. But in that letter, he finds hope to go on despite that. And Beethoven developed the ability to hear music completely in his mind. So that's that famous saying, where there's a will, there's a way. That's Beethoven. I think that's why Beethoven speaks to us so much today. So this second movement is a pastoral movement. Beethoven loved the countryside, spent a lot of time there. And actually all the Romantics did. It was their escape from industrialization. And many people say that the whole violin concerto is a pastoral concerto. But this second movement especially is, you're going to hear like horn calls. Those were used, they would use horns for hunting and other purposes in the countryside. Didn't have cell phones, So here it is. I'm going to start off with the second movement of the violin concerto by Beethoven. so. I think that there's quiet hope there in that music. Beethoven, I mean, try to picture the late 1700s, the early 1800s, what it was like if you were there. It was a time of great change. Both the American and French revolutions were at the end of the 1700s. And yeah, things were changing. Even the way people looked. I mean, if you think of the powdered wigs and all that, that was going away, that was out. And I think that the world of Mozart and Versailles was maybe challenged by people like Beethoven. You know, Beethoven's much more direct, I think, and personal than this earlier era. And so was Paganini. I'm also going to, by the way, this thing I'm doing is, I'm obsessed with the violin, but it's too much trouble for me to learn the violin. My wife told me that. I wanted to, but she said, don't do it, it's crazy, you already play piano. So I'm playing arrangements of violin music for the piano, like that Beethoven was. And now I'm going to play a bunch of the Paganini caprices arranged by Robert Schumann for piano. And I think I played some of them last time. So I'm going to repeat maybe 3 of them that I did, or I don't know. And I'm going to add some new ones I haven't done for you last time. Some of them are really new for me. But Paganini, like Beethoven, he was born in the 1700s, lived into the 1800s, and brought a new period of music in with him. I would say both Beethoven and Paganini, they were like the Big Bang, the two of them in music. One violinist, Yves Gitlis, said Paganini was the Big Bang in music, because it's like his style comes out of nowhere, and everything changed after that, because Paganini was truly a wild man. He was like a rock star of today. Think of Jimi Hendrix or someone in the 60s that said, I mean, that's Paganini. And people thought that he was possessed, some people. We know now, he looked very unusual. He had this very long, gaunt face. But he had Marfan's syndrome, which gave him certain features that were different. Now we know that, but at the time people didn't. But he was a brilliant, fire-breathing musician, very controversial at the time. And I think this first piece you're going to hear why he was controversial. It's crazy. So Schumann and many others, Liszt, the Romantics, they practically, they idolized Paganini. They saw their style in him, and they wanted to be like him. So in the 1830s, both Liszt and Schumann, they did these arrangements of Paganini for the piano. So the original pieces that I'm going to play, the originals, are actually for violin, unaccompanied violin, solo violin. And here Schumann is changing, he's adding a lot of things to make it piano music. So it's very interesting. Here's the first, and I'm going to discuss each one. This first one, it's just wild. It's just wild stuff, so yeah. I told you he was crazy. And I have this theory about Paganini. I went to Italy and I felt like that all the time. And I realized after a few days it was because I had been drinking so much coffee. It's cheap and it's good there. So maybe Paganini drank a lot of coffee, I don't know. Because he certainly sounds very caffeinated all the time. The next piece is called La Chasse, The Hunt, another Paganini Schumann arrangement. This is imitating the sound of horn calls that they used in hunting. I mentioned that for the Beethoven. That's anytime you have that sound in classical music, it's usually referring to either hunting or the countryside or something like Mozart has, horn calls, or what's that? I don't even know what key. Anything, that's the sound of brass horn calls, and that's what this piece is. So there's that link with the Beethoven too, because the Beethoven also had that I started with, but this one's a little more jittery than the Beethoven. Paganini, after all. piano is going to be sort of the meat and potatoes of tonight. I have a few other things and some gospel, but this is the main course. Next is a caprice that I'm not even sure Paganini played publicly, because I read that he actually didn't intend everything to be public. This is like a musical diary entry. It's very personal, it's very understated. You wouldn't expect it from Paganini, the showman, but he also had, a more private side. I think that's this piece. And you're gonna hear these chords that sound like a guitar, like that. Actually, you heard it in the last one too, in the middle there with, right, yeah. It's because Paganini, in addition to being a violinist, was a guitarist. I found out that not that long ago. I was surprised. And he was a great guitarist and composed a lot of guitar music. So I think this could be a guitar piece, easily. Here's the next one. Actually, it doesn't have a title, but if I were to give it a title, it would be Sunset in Tuscany. He was from Tuscany, Paganini, and this sounds like Tuscany to me. I can't say exactly why, but it just feels like it to me. So the next two actually are similar in that they start out funny, almost, like joking, sounds like laughing. That sounds like somebody giggling or something. And then in the middle, it goes berserk, it becomes like angry or something. And it's like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of thing. So here's the next one. Very bizarre piece. And Paganini had a certain kind of sense of humor. I'll talk about that in a bit for the next one. But he had a very unusual but very sharp sense of humor, and you'll hear it in this. take a couple more of these. Like I said, this is the main course tonight. The next one is similar. There's an Italian word for humor in music or joke, scherzo, scherzando. It means joking, but it's not necessarily something you might laugh out loud at. Here's the second scherzo by Chopin, the opening, and you tell me if this is funny. I'm not sure if it is. Like where's the humor there? Where's the joke? Where's the beef? Right? I don't get it. But here's the thing. It has a jump scare, that's for sure. Oops, just like that. It has a jump scare. It starts out quiet, like any good horror movie, and then the skeleton jumps out of the closet. So I think the word is not maybe humor, but it's wit. It's sarcastic wit. And that's Paganini. Paganini has that almost in every note, I think. And this next one, just like the last one, it's a Jekyll and Hyde piece. It starts out humorous, joking, and then it just goes berserk in the middle with anger. And then it goes right back as if nothing happened to being funny and lighthearted. And I want you to imagine a scenario that you're talking to a person. Maybe you know someone like this, hopefully not. And they're just talking to you, they're laughing, they're giggling, and for no reason, something sets them off. And they just they fly into a rage, and then it goes away. And it's like nothing happened. You ever experienced? I've met people's dogs like that, who'll do that, who have an anger problem. And I think that's this piece. Perhaps Paganini had, an anger problem. He's definitely a very high-strung person. I can hear from this. No pun intended with the violin thing, right? But, or maybe it was just that he drank a lot of coffee. I don't know. But at any rate, this is the next Paganini Schumann arrangement. Thank you. Now I'm going to play something that, this is by César Franck. It's the last movement of his violin sonata, and it's an arrangement by Alfred Cortot. César Franck was this genius, Belgian-born, mostly lived in France. He was a church organist for much of his life, and something of a late bloomer. He wrote most of his masterpieces later in life, sort of an opposite character of Mozart, if you can imagine like that. The thing is that he developed this unique style. You're going to hear it. It's not like Paganini, but it's very intense in its own way. It sounds like organ music in a way. He was influenced by Wagner. He was influenced in general by the whole late 19th century Romanticism. But he had his own style. It just, I don't know, it seems like it just came out of nowhere, just like with Paganini. And there's a couple stories about Franck. One is that actually his wife got furious with him at a concert of his music, because apparently he was a very quiet and humble person, Franck. And he'd been married for many years, and there was a concert of his music. Then his music is very intense, and his wife sort of confronted him and said, "Who wrote this music? Is that you? We've been married for, 40 years, and I've never seen this side of you." And so she sort of was upset. I played a Franck, one of these movements of this sonata on Valentine's Day on purpose. I told that story. Another story about Franck, and it actually has to do with marriage, is he wrote this sonata as a wedding present for Eugene Izay, great Belgian-born violinist. And I've always wondered and never really understood how this works as a wedding present. It's very intense music. It was probably a big inspiration for Marcel Proust as well, for his novels, for his way of writing and everything. But how does it work as a wedding present? This piece, it starts out sort of innocently. It almost sounds like a Schubert melody, But it gets dark real fast. And then it ends sort of on a more innocent, more happy note. So I played it somewhere, and I mentioned this story about Franck writing this as a wedding present. And a lady sitting in the back, she raised her hand, she said, "I know why. He wrote it as a wedding present." I said, "Please, I'd like to know." "Well, it's just like marriage," she said. "It starts out innocently, and then it gets dark real fast. And then it resolves, hopefully." And I said, "Ma'am, I think you hit the nail on the head." She made me get it. She made me understand. So here it is, the César Franck, the last one. Nice. I like this. Yeah, that's a good tune. I'm going to do something a little lighter before the Franck. Here, let me see. Wait a minute, I have to turn this on. Yeah. I love that too. Anyway, I'm glad that happened, because the Franck, it gets so heavy, and it even scares me. So I think I needed that little breath of air before this. Yeah. Okay, here it is, the Franck. I'm talking too much to stall, so good luck to you and good luck to me. So now, because a lot of the music I played tonight was like a heavy steak and potatoes with gravy, I'm going to play something really lighter, more like a, I don't know, what's the light? Souffle, that's the word I was looking for. This is more like a souffle. This is Fritz Kreisler's Tambourin Chinois, which means Chinese drum. And Fritz Kreisler was a Viennese composer. His music is so Viennese. I mean, you have Strauss waltzes like the Blue Danube, you have Wiener Schnitzel, Schubert, and Kreisler. And that's Vienna in a nutshell, I think. And this piece, it's very Viennese, but it's inspired by traditional classical Chinese music. Fritz Kreisler and his wife in 1910, they were going through San Francisco, and they heard traditional Chinese music played. And he was so moved by it that he decided to write this piece. He's not copying what he heard, because it still sounds like Kreisler and it sounds like Vienna. And it has his trademark. He had a sense of humor, by the way. I'll tell you about that in a bit. But it's sort of a hybrid of Viennese Kreisler with the influence of traditional Chinese music. Kreisler, unlike most of the great composers, was not known for having a tragic, difficult life. He was always smiling in photos. If you're ever feeling down, go to YouTube and listen to Fritz Kreisler play his sound on the violin. It's like sunshine. He was a sunny person, a wonderful person. He was big friends with Rachmaninoff, and they sort of played pranks on each other. There was a story. Rachmaninoff was, by the way, he hardly ever smiled. Rachmaninoff was tall, he was Russian, he had a shaved head. Someone said he looked like an escaped convict, you know. And so they were giving a recital together, and Kreisler hated to practice. You know, he liked to be with people, didn't like to practice. So in Carnegie Hall, true story, Kreisler messes up, and Rachmaninoff's still playing. He walks over to his friend Rachmaninoff, and he whispers, "Where are we?" And Rachmaninoff growls at him, "Carnegie Hall," you know, as it didn't help him find where he was in the music. So, you know, he had this playful side to him, like this piece. So here's the Chinese drum by Fritz Kreisler. Here it is. gospel pieces, and the first one is something that I wrote out. I arranged from a performance. I tried to be as close to the original as possible. Excuse me. This is based on a recording of Mahalia Jackson singing "We Shall Overcome," which is a great spiritual. Originally was sung very slowly. In the 1950s, people like Pete Seeger and actually Mahalia Jackson herself recorded it. They did it in a more upbeat manner like this. Which is a great version of it. But what I'm doing, what I arranged is a performance Mahalia Jackson gave in the late 1960s. This was after the Civil Rights Movement, after Martin Luther King had been assassinated. Her health was not great at that point, and it slowed down for her. I mean, the way she sang it didn't lose any power. I think it became more powerful. Of course, this song, it's a folk spiritual is really what it is. It was like an anthem for the Civil Rights Movement and became so symbolic, emblematic of that movement and of that time. So here's how she did it at this point. The rhythm changed to something like this. So it got weightier, it had a heaviness to it. So here is that version. I can't copy what she does with her voice, which is so magnificent, but I can try to imitate it. That's what I'm going for. Just like a lot of those pieces I played, those are arrangements of violin pieces. Pianists love to pretend to be something not the piano. Singer, or violinist, cellist, you name it. So here is this arrangement that I wrote out based on Mahalia Jackson singing "We Shall Overcome." Thanks. I'm going to close with a very upbeat, very old-time Southern gospel version of the Unclouded Day. This is sort of a country gospel version, real barnstormer. So here it is, and thank you all very much for coming. I want to thank Gina. I don't know if Gina Rice is here. Oh, thank you for being here. So here's something a little more upbeat and fun and unclouded day. We haven't had a lot of unclouded days recently, right? But today was. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great evening, and I'll see you soon. Love to be back anytime. You know, so. You want more? So. Well, you want another gospel? I mean, I can if you want. Something you want upbeat gospel or not so upbeat? Upbeat. Okay, you want Old Rugged Cross? Yeah, okay, I can do that. Old Rugged Cross, yeah. very much. Thanks for coming. Have a wonderful evening.